Okay, it quickly looks like we have reached critical mass in terms of people coming in. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. As always, I'd first like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians whose land we are broadcasting from here in Canberra. My name is Ryan Edwards. I'm Deputy Director of the Development Policy Centre here at the ANU, and hosting here with me today, I have Arachika Okazaki. For those of you unfamiliar with the centre, we're a research centre here at the Crawford School at the ANU, focused on improving the effectiveness of Australian aid, supporting the development of PNG and the Pacific, and contributing to much better global development policy. All of our work on Pacific economic development and migration is supported by, well, not all, most of it is supported by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade through their Pacific Research Program. Little disclaimer. And yeah, thank you for joining us for today's talk. I'm delighted that we have presenting today our very own Toan Nguyen. Toan has joined us last year as a research fellow here at the Development Policy Centre and the Crawford School. And his research is in labour economics with a particular focus on migration and also family economics. Before joining us, he held academic appointments at the University of Queensland and at Curtin University in Western Australia. Today, Toan is going to present an exciting paper asking whether immigrants to Australia have better labour market outcomes if they have more people of their ethnicity close by in their neighbourhood. I'm particularly excited about this paper and all of Toan's work, actually. A lot of it uses exciting new Australian administrative microdata. This one in particular uses the Australian Census longitudinal database, which tracks us all, well, not all, it's a sample, but it tracks everyone from each census that you filled in. So this one he's using today goes from 2006 to 2011 to 2016, following people. Without much further ado, I will hand over to Toan, who will share his screen. He's going to speak for around half an hour. And as always, you can raise your hand if you have any urgent or pressing questions. But otherwise, we will have a question and answer session at the end where we can talk in more detail. So yeah, over to you, Toan. And yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ryan, for very kind words. Can I share my screen?
Please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Toan Nguyen, a new research fellow at the Development Policy Center and the Uncoordinated Departments of Economics. Today, I'm very happy to present a paper, my recent research, shown with Neil Arson, Benak, Rennie Leff, and Tom Gushen. The paper entitled Do Co-ethnic neighborhoods affect the labor market outcomes of immigrants? Longitudinal evidence from Australia. So understanding the issue related to how residential settlement and mobility decisions affect the labor market's outcomes in the long run of immigrants is important because jobs is important. Job is a very important part of our life, and the integration of immigrants into the labor market is one of the most important factors. I think, or maybe it is the most important factors that contribute to the overall integration of immigrants into the societies, into the host countries. Given the importance of the issues, there's so many studies examine the issues in the European context, in the American context, but in Australia, perhaps because of the lack of data, we don't see many studies in that issues in the Australian context. So, and in Australia, we have so many policies in Australia that restrict the location of immigrants. For example, we have a regional visa. We have a state and territory sponsor visa where we restrict the location of immigrants to particular locations in 2 or 3 years. The question is that how do these restrictions may affect the long-term integration of immigrants into the labor market is important. So this research aims to fill this gap in the literatures. I put a very simple objective to the research that to evaluate the impacts of co-ethnic communities on the labor market outcomes of immigrants in Australia. Co-ethnic communities here is, you can simply imagine about the ethnic enclave, where the immigrants live in larger in the larger co-ethnic community size will have a better labor market outcome in the future. That's the key objectives of the paper. The approach, fortunately, in recent years, we have a significant improvement in the data availability in Australia. Right now, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, they release several products, administrative data that allow us to track individuals in Australia in the long run, in both short run and long run, to examine how some shocks like labor supply shocks or some events that happen in their life earlier in their life affects on their career in the long run. So I choose to use one of those products that called the longitudinal micro sensor data, that they link the sensor 2006 to sensor 2011 and sensor 2016, that they link 3 ways of the sensor, allow us to track the individuals over the 10 years periods. Because of the advancement in the data, we are able to apply more advanced methods, apply econometric methods to address the issue related to the reverse causality, migration selectivity, to produce the causal estimation rather than just to provide a correlation estimation. And in this paper, we estimate the impacts on 4 labor market outcomes: that the labor force participation, the employment, outwork, and the incomes of immigrants. The key findings of the paper. The first finding is that there is no evidence of any causal impacts of co-ethnic communities on the labor market outcomes of immigrants. No matter the place where you settle, where you first settle when you arrive in Australia as an immigrant, no matter surrounded by many immigrants or not many immigrants, it does not affect you in the long run in terms of the labor market. The results remain similar in the 5 years and 10-year periods. So that's a snapshot of my study. In the rest of the presentation, I will go more details on several parts, the motivation of this research. People may ask me that, okay, we already have several studies in Europe, in America. Why don't we just use the study there, the results from those studies, and apply for Australia? Why do we need another study for Australia? The answer is that Australia is a high migration country by international standards. In OECD, we are the second highest immigration country. 30% of our population was born overseas. And even though that before 2000, we don't see the levels of ethnic segregation in Australia is lower than in other countries. However, some groups, for example, the Asian groups, they are more enclave. They enclave. And in the last 20 years, in the first 20 years of the 21st century, we see the rapid expansion of immigrants from Asia. So they soon become more and more important in the Australian context. And in Australia, we have some location-based immigration policy. And the trend is that the government is favoring more and more location-based immigration policy. For example, the regional visa, where we restrict the location of immigrants to regional Australia in 3 years, in first 3 years of their life after their arrival to Australia, or state territory and territory sponsor visa, the 190 visa, that you have to stay in particular state in 2 years. So there's so many location-based policy like that. So how does that, and it may, because of the place restriction, it may resettle immigrants to the location with not many they're co-ethnic aroused. So the question is that how does that affect the life later is important in the context of Australia. In terms of statistics, I extracted this data from the OECD International Migration Outlook. We see the percentage, the y-axis is the percentage and the axis is the OECD countries. We see that the bar that covered by the red color, the second from the right is Australia. We are the second highest countries in terms of foreign born as a percentage of total population in OECD countries, just after Luxembourg. In terms of composition of permanent migration, we see rapid expansion of the overall migration to Australia since 2000, and more towards skills and skilled migrants, especially from Asian. The question is where these immigrants settle in Australia. Here is a figure that I plot the community distribution of immigrants. The x-axis is the community size, and the y-axis is the frequencies. So the more the line skew to the left means that the pattern of distribution of that immigrant groups more closer to the pattern of distribution of total Australian population. We see here Americans, European, their pattern of location is very similar, are more closer to the pattern of distribution of Australian population. Meanwhile, Oceania, the one in the blue, and Asia, they favor the place that have more people from the same countries of origin. And that we see the difference in terms of ethnic segregation among different countries of origins. That raised the demand for the study to examine the impacts of living enclave on the labor market outcomes of immigrants. So that's the context of Australia. How can we learn from overseas? The evidence from overseas are mixed. We have some positive impacts and we have some negative impacts. The evidence from Sweden and Denmark suggests that living in the co-ethnic communities, lack of co-ethnic communities, has a positive impact on immigrants' earnings. There are two seminal papers. The first one in 2003 that published in quarterly journals of economics, the best journals in the fields of economics. And the second, a very good one in the Denmark context by Anna Kildam in 2009, published in Journal of Economics, the best one in the fields of labor economics. So they presented three a mechanism that explain for the positive impacts of co-ethnic communities on refugees, especially on low-income, low-skilled immigrants, that ethnic network have to circulate the information about the labor market opportunities. And that have to facilitate the access to employment and improve the occupational skill matching. Because if you live within the communities, your communities, and your language, for example, your English is not fluent enough, living within your community will have to receive more information. You know more about the job market in the host countries. Anderson's in the papers in International Migration Review recent year explained another channel that the ethnic enclave have to foster the self-employment. You live in the co-ethnic communities, you have more information, you have more motivation, you have more support, both in terms of have and in terms of more clients to build your own business. And also another channel by a very long time ago, Podcast and Back in a book to explain about Latin migrants the life of Latin and Cuban migrants in the US, saying that living in the co-ethnic neighborhoods can provide job opportunities in co-ethnic firms or the business that have more immigrants in that firms already. Otherwise, if they live outside, they are discriminated from the primary labor markets. But in these studies, they also state that the strength of this relationship seem to be moderate for high-skilled immigrants. That's quite reasonable, because if you are high-skilled, integrate well with the society, can read English newspaper fluently, then you don't need much information from the co-ethnic communities. There's positive impacts, the research that showing the positive impacts. And people say that economists rarely agree in anything. It's similar to these issues. We have a negative impacts. The study that find the negative impacts in the United States, a C and Gao paper find a negative impact. And in Canada, Waman, in the paper that published in Canadian Journals of Economics in 2007, found a negative impact as well. And they explained that the ethnic network may help in the first 1 or 2 years, but then it creates the barriers to absorb new knowledge, to improve the language. So in long run, it damage to the labor market integration. And also the co-ethnic concentration occurs more in the ones who has lower skills and lower economic resources. So that have an adverse selection. And this one may due to some reason with higher crime. That's the explanation. So we see here clearly we have the difference in the literature, the conflicts in the literature. The discrepancies come from the different data sets that they are using, whether that are cross-sectionals or longitudinals, the methods that they approach, whether they attract the reverse causality and the unobservable factors that may influence in the market, and the characteristics of the co-ethnic community as well. So that's why we need a specific study for Australia context. So how about Australia? In Australia, because of the limitation in terms of data, there are not many studies about the issues. Very early, we have a study using the cross-sectional data by Barry Chiswick and Paul Miller. Paul Miller is a high-profile professor in economics of immigration who passed away 8 years ago. And they saw the co-ethnic communities were more prevalent among migrants with low English fluency, which I can show you later that still remains unchanged until now. And recent study, there's another study that just released last year before the release of Michael King paper, that they use longitudinal data from the household income and labor dynamics in Australia, the HUDA survey. And they revealed that there's a positive association between co-ethnic community living and earnings, including for the skilled migrants. But the point with the HUDA survey is that the survey is designed is a panel, and the first way is in 2000, and they just have about 13,000 individuals and with 8,000 immigrants. So they're not enough observation to control for residential mobility and to apply the cutting-edge techniques. Also, because the small sample size, they need to include all immigrants from so many years prior to 1990. At that time, the immigration policy is very different. So we have very heterogeneity in the samples. So it's very difficult to control for unobservable factors. To address issues, I use more cutting-edge data. We have the Australian census longitudinal data set that the ABS, they link the census in 2006, 2011, 2016, 3 ways of census. That allows us to track individual residential and employment trajectory over 10 years periods. And also other change in individual characteristics, such as education, such as marital status, numbers of children, residential mobility as well. And they released the 5% samples of Australian population for researchers. So I work on the 5% samples of Australian population. That's the data set that I use. In terms of co-ethnic communities, I measure at the SA2 level, but I use the full census draw from the ABS table builder to calculate that. People may ask, why do I implement this research at SA2 level? Why is not SA4? Because SA4 is the definition of closed labor market. Because I wanted to focus more on the ethnic network angle. And with the ethnic network, the SA2 is the best measure, follows the international standards. In Australia, we have about 2,300 SA2 with a population size from 3,000 to 25,000. In 2006, we don't have a SA2 definition. So I have to make the concordance using the Central Collection District from 2006 and aggregate it up to concord with the data in 2011 and 2016. And the Australian census does not collect the information on ethnicity. So we use the country of birth as a proxy for the co-ethnic communities. So the co-ethnic communities that I mentioned mean that the numbers of individuals from the same country of birth live in that region. Here is a SA2. And in the measure, I use a log form, the logarithm forms of the measurement. That's all about the data that I use for that research. The methods I apply the econometric techniques. So the baseline regression, we can see that we have a labor market outcome variables on the left-hand side, real income, unemployment, labor force participation, hours work. M stand for migrants, J country of birth, K SA2s of residents, and T stand for years. We control for the year fixed effect because we need to control for the business cycles. Some years the country suffer the business cycle. For example, in 2011, our country suffered the burst in the mining burst. So we need to control for the year fixed effects. I control for the SA2 fixed effects in the regression because each SA2 has different characteristics. Some SA2 has higher income than other SA2. So I control for that. And I control for individual fixed effects that control for unobservable individual characteristics. The vector X is the vectors of time varying characteristics, include the age of migrants, marital status, education attainment, and the numbers of children they ever born. The key variables is the size of the community formed by country of birth in the suburb case in year T, so that the beta is our coefficient of interest. We just need to run this sample, to run this regression on our sample. But when I take a look at the data, there's some hint like that. If we apply this simple regression, we may have a problem with the selection bias. We see here in this figure, it shows that lower income immigrants tended to locate in the larger co-ethnic communities in 2006. This snapshot is for the one who live. I take a snapshot in the initial years in 2006 to see the balance of our sample. The low income tend to live more in the larger co-ethnic communities, very like in line with previous studies overseas. In terms of employment, we see here there is a surprise that the one who live in co-ethnic, larger co-ethnic neighborhood side tended to have a better employment status than the one who live outside. But this is just a part of the story, because we know that when the census they measure about unemployed and employed, they don't measure the labor force participation. So I take a look at the labor force participation. It's actually that the one who live in the larger co-ethnic community side, they not participate. Many of them not participate in the labor force compared to the one who live in smaller one. We have the higher, in terms of working hours, the one who live in a smaller co-ethnic community side had higher numbers of working hours compared to the one who live outside. And in terms of English fluency, in line with the previous study, we can see here the one who speak English well live closer to the distribution of Australian population. So this creates the concern that the distribution are not exogenous. The distribution of immigrants in the initial years are based on their choice, are based on their characteristic, and that characteristic influence on their labor market outcome in the future. So we need to address the issues. And another issue is that in Australia, people are change their address after the initial settlement. We have a three group: the bachelor, diploma, and high school by education. We can see here that the bachelor, the one who have bachelor and diploma, tend to more mobilized than the one which has a high school degree. And within one categories of education, we can see that the one, for example, the one with a bachelor degree, they tend to move more to the smaller co-ethnic communities compared to the larger co-ethnic community, 35% compared to 23% just after 5 years. Similarly, we see the same pattern for income group. The one with high income tend to change their address compared to the one with lower income. And the one who move to the smaller co-ethnic community tend to more higher income than the one to move to larger co-ethnic communities. So if we don't control for this one, we will have problems in the estimation. 3 problems I identify here. The first is the individual sorting. That means that migration choice, the migrant's choice of place of residence often depends on the individual characteristics. We are correlated with the labor market outcomes. So that creates an issue in the bias. That creates the bias in the estimation. And migrants change their residential location in year T+5, T+10 in the sample. And the one who change their location to the smaller co-ethnic communities actually are the one who has better labor market outcomes. And that better labor market outcome, maybe we are not sure, but maybe that because of the help from the initial settlement in the place with larger community size. So to have a correct estimation, we need to take into account this issue. Also, because of the reverse causality, because the location, the reason with higher levels of economics outcomes may have attract more immigrants and create the larger co-ethnic community size, and on which 3 problems will cause the bias in the estimation. So in this paper, I suggest some solutions to address these these important issues. The first is that to address issues of individual sorting. That means that individuals who come to larger co-ethnic community side tend to have a lower economic characteristics like education, wage, age, something like that. I restrict our sample to the recent arrival immigrants who settle in just 2001, 2006. Why do we need to restrict that? Because the one who arrived before 2001, we have several refugee community from Vietnam, from other countries, and we have a family reunion dominate. After 2001, we have more dominated by high school, and the samples are more homogeneous. The fact of that restriction is that it creates a more homogeneous samples. And I apply the propensity score matching. The ideas of the propensity score matching is that you weight an individual, the choice of their choice of the place of residence based on their observable characteristics at the initial settlements to reduce the noise caused by individual sorting. Of course, this is just mitigate the issue. It's not completely 100% address the issue. To fully address the issue, you need to have two identical person. One settle in the place with larger co-ethnic community. Another one, the identical person who settle in the smaller co-ethnic community, and you track the labor market outcome of the two person after 5 years and 10 years. But we don't have that opportunities in Australia. So I do everything to apply the more recent methods to address the issues.
Hey, Toan, I'm just going to interrupt you really briefly to let you know that we're at double time at the moment. So let's just try and wrap up in the next 5 to 10 minutes, please. Okay,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to control for the one who to control for the issues of residential mobility, I control for the one who migrate to the suburb with a larger co-ethnic communities. That I instruct the key variables of interest with the ML1 is the dummy variable, take values of 1. If that migrant migrated to the larger co-ethnic communities, and to the MS means smaller. So the value here indicate that the individuals move to the smaller co-ethnic communities. And to address the regional sorting, I apply the instrument variable that follow a very famous paper by Kerr and Lincoln that published in Journal of Labor Economics that have about like 1,000 citations until now. That I proxy the co-ethnic communities by the initial size of the co-ethnic communities plus with the products of the SIP at the national level and the SIP at the national level. I'm sorry, the inflows at the national level. And the share of that ethnic in the suburb in the initial year. So that's the instrument variable to address the issue that the regional sorting that I mentioned. And after applies all the methods to address the issues about reverse causality, individual sorting, residential mobility, the estimation results based on the samples of 32,000, because that's the 5% samples of Australian population. And we select recent migrants from 2001 to 2016, track them in 3 waves. We have about like 31,000 observation, 32,000 observation. And the key estimation show us that there is no impact of living closer to the larger co-ethnic communities, has better labor market outcome in terms of lot of weekly incomes, in terms of hours of work. The estimation are on statistically insignificant, and the magnitude are very small. And you can see that the same happened with the unemployment and the participation. So it's safe to say that there's no causal impacts of living enclave on the labor market's outcome after 5 and 10 years. I checked it with various robustness checks, exercise with and without propensity score matching, exercise with and without instrumental variables. Results remain unchanged in the 5-year and 10-year sample. And results are similar when we change the key variables of interest. Instead of using a log form, I use the share in terms of percentage form. The results are unchanged. So results are quite firm that we don't have any impacts of living enclave on the labor market outcomes of immigrants. The concluding remark, we see that the longitudinal approach combined with robust methods, more representative data, resulted in a smaller impact than previous study. And in the future, I may have a chance to look at the variation by country of birth, ancestry, and ancestry, because some group like Pacific migrants, the measure by country of birth may not be as precise as measurement by the ancestry. And it hints that regional migrants, the regional visa should not be an economic disadvantage to immigrants in the future. So that's all about my presentation today. Thank you so much for your attendance. And here's the time for the question and answer.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Toan. Yeah, everyone, please do turn on your videos so we can see the group and it feels a tad less impersonal now that he's finished, and we can move on to questions. So please do use the raise hand button so you can ask the question and the reactions, or if you have trouble doing that or would prefer me to raise the question, you can also post it in the chat and then we can weave it in. While I wait for a first hand to show up in my participants list, I'll cut to a question from Paul Amors here, who has mentioned that, unless you want to say, do you want to say it, Paul?
Not allowing me to unmute. Oh, I'm unmuted.
Thanks,
okay, cool. I mean, I guess you kind of addressed this in your concluding remarks, which is just that, like, you know, maybe people don't just benefit from having a community from your own country, but also from the same language group or region. So your Pacific Islander example was one, but, you know, maybe, you know, Vietnamese people don't just get benefit from being surrounded by Vietnamese people, but also like other Southeast Asians. And then the other question, I suppose, is also just that, like, you know, maybe some regions, some SA2s are just better at integrating immigrants. And so, you know, irrespective of what country those immigrants are from, maybe if you move to an area that has had lots of immigrants, you're still going to have some effects, or you're still going to see some variation in outcomes. And so I wonder, I don't know, if maybe looking at those kinds of comparisons would change things in your results.
Thank you so much, Toan, for the first question. Yeah, I agree that there are several definitions, and it depends on the definition of to define the co-ethnic communities. I use the definition by international standards in the QJE paper that used by Per Ander Edin, Peter Frederiksen, and Olof Aslund, and later by Anna Pudam in the Journal of Labor Economics paper. That's the international standard. But yeah, to take into account that some group that they more benefit in terms of group, for example, Pacific migrants, we need to do more implementation on that. For the concerns about the SA2, some SA2 have a disadvantage. In the regression, actually, I already include the different caused by the SA2 fixed effects in the baseline and in the final estimation. If you can see here, we have the data case that's controlled for the suburb, the region fixed effects already.
Sorry.
No, cool, I am unmuted, thanks. So, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is instead of defining your E there by country of birth, you could also have E by just the number of immigrants that already live in the SA2.
Yeah, I can do that. And actually not in, because the constraints were submission to the demography journal, so I removed that from the analysis, but I done that for prod definition, and the results remain unchanged for Australia.
Okay. All right, thank you.
That was my one question about whether you would do that like that with any, it would look the same with any immigrants, or say just doing it by region as well, which is a bit more flexible definition. Next up, I think Stephen raised his hand, and then we'll go back to the chat. Stephen. Oh, you're muted.
You're mute, Stephen.
Or your microphone's not working. Okay, we can't hear Stephen. We're going to the chat questions. Gabrielle, did you want to say yours, or do you want me to read it?
Oh, I can't unmute. Oh yeah, okay, I can unmute. Sorry, thanks, Harry. Yeah, I just had two questions. Hi, Toan, nice to see you. And
hi, Gabriella.
As well. One was about the data set that's been used and whether or not you've considered other types of administrative data set that the ABS is bringing in, which might have more regular intervals than census, because that can be quite cumbersome in terms of trying to get any decent analysis out of it. And the other, or any regular, sorry, not regular analysis out of it, I guess is more appropriate. And then my second question was about, so a lot of the regional restrictions on those visas that you mentioned were not binding. So the government didn't really have any way of keeping people in those regions at that time. Obviously, they got a bit more militant about it in 2019 and started introducing more strict visas and restrictions on visas after that. So I was just wondering if that issue would have any impacts on your methodology or on your results. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriella. Yeah, this research was conducted in 2020. At that time, the MADIF that they constructed for several components hasn't finished yet, and I use this, but I will improve that using the MADIF. That is a better data set. I agree with you. So I will use that in the future, not for that research, but for other research as well, because that's a very important data set for Australia. And that had a visa subclass, which is very important information. I think that's a very valuable data set. The second is about regional restriction. In our paper, as you have seen, that we don't include any restricted on any visa class, so it hasn't affected us. I control for the residential mobilities based on the link in the census, that's the actual move. But later, if the government has some funding and there's some demand, we can do some specific research for a specific visa subclass with a restriction on the location of immigrants in the future.
Cool. Then next up, Jacqueline. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to jump in? I'm looking for more hands. Oh, it's still just Stephen's hand, but I think Stephen's mic is not working.
Okay, do I unmute myself?
Yep, we got you.
Oh yeah, I just it's very nice paper. Thank you for presenting these results. So I think I just want to give you like some idea about my intuition about the mechanism behind the results. So have you considered the like job training programs available to the immigrants across different countries? So this is out my intuition because my spouse is actually in the labor market trying to find a job. But I find Australia has a lot of resources for new immigrants for their access to the labor market. So if that is kind of the driving force, then you would not be able to, or you would find very insignificant result from the background ethnicity or your network. So I'm thinking maybe, not sure whether there is actually a variation in that dimension, but just my intuition.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that idea is very interesting. And I know that some people right now, they are using the MADIF that I've just mentioned before to consider the effects of job training programs on the assimilation of immigrants in Australia. That should be a very interesting paper. And another paper, they compare whether if the degree of the migrants are recognized in Australia, whether they have better labor market outcome. In this paper, I look specific to the angles of ethnic network, but yeah, it's worth to consider to extend the paper to see how that happen when we have some intervention from government, especially the job training, which the government do not need to pay a lot of money, but still bring a lot of benefits to immigrants. So it's an interesting idea. Thank you so much.
Stephen, did you want to try your microphone again?
Yeah, is that working?
Yep, we got you.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, well, look, it's a really nice paper and very interesting. Try to just follow up with two questions. One is your sense that the other papers for like Denmark, I think you mentioned that if they used your method, they would not find this effect. So they're sort of exaggerating the effect of this co-location because they're not applying those controls, or do you think Australia is just different? Is there any reflection on that? And then, you mentioned like the implications for these regional restrictions. And I was thinking, I mean, you could just directly test that, right? Because here you are just like, you are in a sense sort of randomly assigning, you're trying to estimate what would happen if you randomly assigned migrants to either live with each other or live on their own. And so you could apply the same methodology and, you're trying to imitate an experiment where migrants are sort of randomly assigned either to regional areas or to urban areas. So that would be a more direct way to test that rather than, I'm not sure you can conclude anything from this work about regional restrictions. But thank you, it's great to see your work.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for the first question about the difference in the studies of Denmark and Australia. As I mentioned before, the context the difference. In the study of Denmark, they use a natural experiment from the resettlement of the refugees to different locations of the Denmark. In Australia, 70% of our population come from high skill background. Just about 10,000 a year come from humanitarian. So very different. And in Australia, I think the context is a little bit different here. Denmark, they speak Danish. Australia, we speak English in the community. So it may cause a bit difference. Also, yeah, you're right. To precisely implicate about a location restriction, we need to test that directly. But this just provide a hint on that. I saw about Richard Curtin that about the country of birth available variables is a particular problem for migrants from PNG because most of those born in PNG, over 2/3, now living in Australia and has Australian or other non-PNG parents. That's very interesting. That come to the root question that how do we define immigrants? I use the international definitions in the literatures of economics, but I can do another check to use the ancestry for specific groups, Pacific migrants that I already discussed with my boss, Ryan and Stephen, that we need to replicate that with the ancestry rather than the country of birth for the Pacific migrants.
Please don't call me boss, Toan. I have one question related to just what's the intuition on how you're addressing the sorting, right? If we think about people are moving to the jobs, right? If there isn't really much by way of a restriction, you've got a skilled visa to work in some particular region, and let's just say you can move. I feel like you would then, like you were saying at the start, the selection problem is you would sort into an area where there might be a fit. You might move to an SA2 where you'll get that fit. But then this is sort of an omitted variable problem, right? Where I imagine that then the areas where there are already folks from your country or just general high immigrant densities, that particular sector match job might be filled. And so it could go either way. They could be going away from that or to that one. So how again, can you explain how that problem of sorting is fixed, that they're not responding to that their location isn't a function of the ethnic density, or at least some strong correlate of the ethnic density?
Thank you so much, because I have a two solution for that. Of course, it's not ideally 100% address the issues, as I mentioned. Very similar, because as I mentioned, to ideally address the issue with the individual sorting, we need two identical persons. like two identical Toan Nguyen. The first one put that in the larger co-ethnic community, and the second one, the second Toan Nguyen, put in smaller co-ethnic communities of Vietnamese, and compare the labor market outcomes of the two, given that they don't move to other location after 5 years, 10 years, and we compare for that, compare the labor market outcomes of the two persons. We don't have that in practice. So I try to mind map that, try to retrieve a sample to have more homogeneous samples, apply propensity score matching to weigh conditionals of the initial settlements on the first, on the characteristic of immigrants. Of course, we can't control for the unobservable characteristic here. So we weigh the samples, run the weight regression in the analysis. And the second, regarding to the reverse causalities of some location may attract more immigrants and use a larger co-ethnic community because they are already attractive. They have more vibrant economic condition. I use a conditional instrument variable that's used in currently, and it should be reminded that in this sample we consider the change in the economic outcomes of immigrants and the change in the size in the co-ethnic community size, because we already have the fixed effects at the regional level, and we already control for the individual fixed effects. So the thing that we consider is actually the change in the labor market outcomes of immigrants. For example, how their salary increased after 5 years from 2006 to 2011, compare when they live in a co-ethnic community size that larger than other communities. That we compare the change. So, and we proxy this using the instrument style that while this one is actually kind of a SIP share approach. When you see the inflow variable here is the SIP at the national level and the share at the regional level, we assume that the SIP at the national level is not endogenous with the share at the regional level. That's the key assumption. So I hope that with the set of tactics here, we can address the issue. Maybe later, if I have money, funding, I can have an experiment that can address the issue. But right now, with the lack of resources, that's the best I can do for the types of the estimation.
No, that's great. Thanks, Toan. One other just sort of related question is, in your individual characteristics, does the Australian census have like number of moves? Normally migration questions are like, where were you 5 years ago, or where were you born? But can you get a sense from the data set of the number of moves? So how mobile each individual is to build up their wages?
We don't have numbers of moves. Here I control for the location in 2011 and the location in 2006 only. So we don't know how many moves they have, an immigrant has within 5 years. But with the MADIP data that Gabriel and La mentioned, we can measure that.
Yeah, but you can see if they have moved. You've got movers and non-movers within the immigrant group. Yeah, okay, cool. No, that sounds like an interesting extension, because obviously people who can move are more competitive and can bid up their wages more. So yeah, cool. Do we have any more questions? I'm just filling time while waiting for more hands. So don't let me keep talking. We've got about a few minutes left, I think 5 more minutes until we'll wrap up. Otherwise, I can. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. The hammer's about to come down. Okay, it's always good to, breaking from my usual form of running late, it's always good to finish early. So I guess with that, yeah, please everyone join me in thanking Toan for the presentation, and thank you everyone else for joining and sharing in Toan's research. We do keep an eye out for our February seminar, which we should be advertising shortly once it's confirmed. We'll be running these monthly migration seminars right up to the Pacific update in June. So yeah, please keep an eye out, and I hope we can see you in the future, and have a great week, everyone. With that, we can end the broadcast.